So I'm finally ready to admit that I've been in an abusive relationship for many years. Only it's not what you think. It's not a relationship I have with my wife. My wife is an angel. She's not abusive in any way. It's not with either of my parents or any other member of my family or close-knit community. I came across this realization the other week when I was in a session, and I was reflecting on a moment in my life. I was a teenager in high school, and I had a really big letdown. I was basically determined to make the varsity baseball team. And there was a huge change in the coaching staff right before we had our tryouts. And a whole new system was brought in, new players that were younger than me, new coaches, new style, no history. And I began to get the sense that I wasn't going to be a part of the future plans. I was a junior and they didn't really want me involved anymore. It was obvious. And I was experiencing a lot of turmoil because prior to this, I had an expectation that I was going to be on the varsity level. I was going to be able to play and perform in some really competitive environments. It was crushing. I felt a huge letdown. I was sad, angry, frustrated, confused. I didn't know what to do. And I looked to my parents for guidance. And in that moment, my parents really gave me a choice. They said, well, you can quit or you can roll with it, but you got to make a decision. And I remember looking at my father, and I remember wishing that he would tell me to just keep going, to just keep trying, to not quit, to not put that decision in somebody else's hands, but to go out on my own terms. But instead they gave me that choice, and I quit. I didn't have the capacity to withstand the emotional turmoil that I was going through. But in that moment was when I lost some trust for my parents, and it wasn't their fault. In fact, looking back on it, I think they did a great job giving me the decision. I was 16 years old. They empowered me to decide for myself, but I wanted them to challenge me. I wanted them to give me some sort of motivational speech that deterred me from quitting. And in that moment, I started to parent myself unconsciously because I didn't trust that my parents could motivate me to the level of greatness that I wanted to achieve in my life. But that was also the very moment that I entered an abusive relationship. And it wasn't with my parents. It wasn't with somebody else. It was with myself. I entered into an abusive relationship with myself where the dialogue always occurred up in my head, in between my ears. Now, you might be able to relate to this because I'm sure you're just like me. You probably have a lot of negative self-talk. You probably have learned to motivate yourself from stress or belittling or critiquing yourself over time, maybe to varying degrees. But we all have that critic inside of our heads that is constantly analyzing and assessing how I'm doing. And if you have a voice in your head that's similar to mine, it can be downright abusive. In fact, there's things that I've said in my head to myself, ways that I've held myself to the fire in my own mind that I would never in a million years do to another human being. It would be unfair. It would be unjust. In some cases, it would be illegal to do and say the things that I've said to myself in my own mind. And I know that this is not a new or novel concept. We're aware of the impact of self-talk. I mean, just look at the rates of depression, anxiety, and suicides. It's obvious that we have an epidemic of negative self-talk, of critical self-thinking, critical self-image. I mean, just look at it. Every single layer and level, none of us are good enough for ourselves. But when I started to look at this recently as being in an abusive relationship, I recognized myself as an abused person. Now, this is not to create some sort of victim role or feel-bad story about how I've treated myself, but just to acknowledge the degree to which I've been harming myself, the violence in the language that I've had, the things that I've said in my head. You're a piece of shit. Suck it up. Man up. Those things that I've said I would never say to another man. I've been telling myself all along. And what makes it okay for me to do that to myself, but not to do that to another person? What makes it okay for me to say that to me, but also know that I would never do that to somebody else? It's incongruent. It's out of balance. But for some reason, because all of those words and violent language and negative conditioning that I have, because it lives up here and nobody else gets to see it, it's okay. Just like an abusive relationship, right? When we actually hear stories about people who have actually been physically, emotionally, sexually abused, so much of that suffering happens in silence. Because as long as it lives inside of a box or behind a wall, behind a screen, then it can live. And society doesn't see it. The community doesn't recognize it or even know that it exists. As soon as it's brought to light, there's outrage. There's an immediate stop put to that type of behavior. So I'm outing myself right now. I'm admitting that I've been in an abusive relationship with myself in my own mind and in my actions. The way that I've talked to myself, the emotional hardship that I've placed on myself because I'm never good enough, because I don't know enough, because I'm too slow, because I'm too dumb, because I made bad choices, because I put people I love in compromising situations, thinking that I was doing my best when really I was selling myself out. All of this negative critique that I have, all of the ways that I beat myself down, that I don't give myself a break, that I don't give myself any credit for doing my best with what I had available to me. And I say no more. No more. It's unacceptable. I won't accept being in this type of relationship with myself anymore. And just like any other abusive dynamic, I know that it's going to take time for me to condition and recondition my relationship with myself the way I want it to be. But a huge step for me right now is outing it, calling it forward, letting it be more than just negative self-talk or being a little more self-critical than I should be, but just downright abusive and violent to myself. Violent with the language and thoughts that I've had about myself. And say that it's not okay. And also to you, if you're in the same position as me, if you can resonate with the description of a relationship that I have had with myself and you feel some part of that, even if it's a small bit, then I'm also going to give you the invitation to say that's not okay for you. Don't let that be okay for you anymore, because it's not. It wouldn't be okay for you to speak that way to me or anybody else. It wouldn't be okay for you to speak that way to your partner, to your children, to your loved ones, to your coworkers. So ask yourself, what makes it okay for you to talk like that to you? Make sure that you go and join us to talk about this conversation. Bring it out into the open. And what you can do first is go to risingman.org/brotherhood, get yourself registered for the free Spark container where you can come in and we talk about these topics every single Wednesday. Get yourself registered. Let's let this conversation be more normalized so that we can put an end to the self-abuse that we're all doing inside the confines of our own minds. And make sure you share this up with somebody else who needs to hear it. Because I know there's a lot of you out there, just like me, who are beating ourselves up, calling it motivation, but disguising the abuse that's happening. Make sure you tune in for next week's Monday morning meditation. Hope you enjoyed this one.